Hello guys, welcome to this discourse as regards to the useReducer hook in React. Now in the last video we did a simple counter application where we built up to how the useReducer logic works. In this video I promised to take you through how forms can be handled using the useReducer hook in React. First of all, before I start, I'd like to talk about how forms work in general. Now, forms have their own internal state. That state is used to keep track of what is imputed into those forms. But then in React, forms need to have one source of truth, meaning they need to maintain one state. And the way that we do that in React is that we have controlled inputs, meaning they have one source of truth. To show you how that works, I'd like to use an example. And first, I'd just like to use the useState hook before we get to the useReducer hook. Now, first of all, I'd like to explain what I have here. I only have a simple form with an input field of the name, and then the other with an input field of email. Now, normally in React, what we do, we'd first of all do this. Let me just first of all import the useState hook from React, like so. Now, what we do, we'd initially declare state or the form data. So first of all, let's do that. Let's call it form data and set form data. Then inside here, we'd have an object which contains the data of all the input fields here. So we'll have an object. The first key will be name, set it to an empty string. And the second, in our case, will be email, an empty string also. Now from here, in order for us to have these fields controlled, we'd have an attribute called value right down here. And then we'd say we'd equate it to this key here for the name to begin with. So that would be form data dot name. And then we'd have the same down here. But then we'd change this to email. Now, if I save this and try to type into these fields, you see nothing works. That's because this value, the value inside the input field, is actually initiated to this value here, which is an empty string. If at all I changed any value here, let's say Nathan, you'd see it right here. Now for us to have this state dynamically change, what we'd normally do is that we'll have an onChange attribute on these form inputs. So that looks something like this. And we'll have a function, we'll define it outside. Let's say handle change. Then we do the same for the other input field. Then we'd come up here and just define our function. Handle change. Now this function by default has an event object passed to it from the form. And what we'd normally do here, we'd do something like set form data. And then from here, what we do, because our form data initially is an object, we'd actually need to take in the previous values that we had. So we do an arrow function, an anonymous arrow function inside here, and take in the previous data. And then what we'll do, we'd return an object where we spread in the previous form data. And then from there, we'd have the key as the event.target.id. and then we'll have the value as the event.target.value. Now this is what I've done. I've taken in the previous form data, which is an object. Then I've returned a new state object in which I've spread in the previous form data. And then I've used the event.target.id, which is name for this case. And the second, it has to be email, sorry for that, email for the second input field. Now what this does is that it dynamically knows which input field has changed based off on the ID, or normally some people just would have it as a name down here, but then for this case, let's just use the ID. And then if once we found that field which has changed, then we populate that with a new value from the input fields. Now, if I typed inside here, you see the form works. Now these form inputs are controlled, meaning they have one source of truth. Now, let's now get on to changing all this into the useReducer hook. So first of all, what I'll do, I'll import it from React. And then from before, what we did, we had an initial state. And then this one will initialize that to an object. And then we'll have the form data as the first key. And then we'll just have the name here as an empty string. And then the email as an empty string too. And down here we'd have state. And there we'll have set state instead. And so we will have a dispatch. I still have the initial example that we had from the previous video. Then inside here we'll have useReducer. Then we'll clear this off. Then we'll have the reducer, and then initialize this with the initial state. Then we'll define our reducer up here. And if you remember, our reducer took in the state, and then we had the action. If I save this, then get rid of this, then down here I'd need to change this. Because we have an object inside an object, then we'll have two levels to go. The first one will be state.formData.name, and then down here we do the same with go state.formData and then email. And inside here, once I type, you see it doesn't work also. Now, how do we have the same behavior from the previous example where we used useState? How do we have one source of truth for this form? Now what we do here, it's quite simple actually. So remember we had the switch statement, and now we'll test the action and type. And then based on that, we'd actually change the inputs. Now, we have our first case. Now let's call this handle change. Let me do the camel case. Handle change. Then we'd return an object. So first of all, what we do, we'd spread in the previous state. And then from here, now notice, because our form data was an object, we'd need to return an object too. Now we return an object, and then we'd spread in the previous form data values. And that would be something like this. Then we'll have state form data. Now, based on this, we'd need to change these values inside here. But then we don't have direct access to them. But the good thing is we have access to the field and the target ID using this handle change function down here. And this is how that would look like. We'd actually have to pass those values in using the dispatch. Then I'll show you how we do it using the payload. So first of all, what we do is this. We do action, not payload, and then I'll call this field. And then for the value I do action, payload, value. And then inside here, sorry, I needed to do this, to do form data, set it to the new object, and that should work. Now, down here, inside my handle change function, this is what I'll do. I'll do dispatch, and then I'll just dispatch the type as handle change. This needs to be a string. And then, now for the payload. The payload will be an object, and then it will have the field. So we'll have the field as e.target.id. And we'll also have the value as e target. The value down here. It seems like we have an error. An expected token. Oh yeah, we didn't close this up. Let's see. Type. Oh yeah, this needs to be payload. And there we have it. That should work now. Now, if at all I typed inside here, you see now we have our controlled inputs. Now let me go through what we have here. So for initial state, we have an object which contains another object that is synonymous to how form data looks like. Now, so we have a name and an email. And then down here, I've initialized our state with the initial state. And then I've set the values of our inputs to whatever we have in our initial state down here. Then I have an onChange function, which handles the change inside our inputs. Now I also have a reducer function, which checks in the state and the action. Now we test to see what type of action is being dispatched into this reducer. And if that action matches handle change, this is what we do. We take in the previous state and we spread it in, but then we change the form data based on what we get from the form. And that's why we've spread in the previous form data. And then this action.payload.field is actually the form fields that we have here. And then the value is whatever a user types inside here. And now based on that, we mutate this form data and then return it within the state. And then by doing that, we have control inputs. Now, let's say you had another piece of state. Let's say you had a previous counter application. Then you see your code will be cluttered. And then in the last video, I promised to do separation of concerns by having this in different files. So what I'll do here, I'll have a utilities folder. I'll just define a new JSX. Let's call it reducer. Then inside here, I'll copy whatever we add inside the app. And then bring it here. And then I'll directly export them. Then down here, we'll also do the same. Then inside here, we just import the two of them. Initial state. Then we'll also have our reducer function. And if I save this, this should still work. So it's always a good idea to have separation of constants and to have your code quite clean. And the only way to do that is to have it to have whatever that doesn't need or doesn't necessarily need to function within the same component defined elsewhere, and mostly you have it within the utilities folder here. And that's it for controlled inputs. I hope you guys liked the video. If you liked it, leave a like. And if you're not subscribed, subscribe. And if you have any comment, leave it down below. I'll make sure to reply. And for any questions, I'll also look for the answers for you. Thank you and have a good time.